You are listening to the Pens Nation radio show on thepensnation.com. Follow us on Twitter at @thepensnation.
It's the Pens Nation radio show, and we're inching closer and closer to the NHL Trade Deadline because, where there's smoke, there's fire, and there is certainly a lot of smoke starting to billow over the past 24 hours. It's really starting to ramp up a bit now. More and more names are being tossed into the rumor mill. Ryan Kesler, Marty St. Louis yesterday were reported as demanding trades from their respective teams, and go figure, the Pittsburgh Penguins are linked to some of these potential trade partners. It's something that we've kind of come to expect here in Pittsburgh in his 8 years as general manager. Ray Shiro's basically stood pat just really one time in that 8-year span. I'm Nick. You can get a hold of us on Twitter by following the Pens Nation. You can tweet us there. You can also follow me on Twitter as well, PensNation_Nick. I'm joined tonight by Casey Johnston. Follow Casey at CaseyR82. And also joining us tonight from thehockeywriters.com and Forbes Sports Money is Mike Colligan. Mike, thanks for joining us tonight.
Yeah, great to be back, guys. I feel like we do this kind of every year around this time, and I think you nailed it. It's got a different feel this year where it's not the fans or the media or anyone else kind of getting the buzz going. It's the players themselves, and I think that's a different feel when guys like Ryan Kesler and Martin St. Louis are going out there and demanding trades and kind of forcing the hands of their general managers. That changes the dynamics a bit, and I think that's what really got this thing going again, because coming out of the Olympics, it just didn't feel like trade deadline time. I felt like we were kind of stuck in that European style of hockey, not much excitement, but certainly within the last 24 hours, it's ramped up quite a bit.
Yeah, it has, and you're right. That's something that we haven't really seen before, and especially from guys that have been longtime tenants of their teams. I mean, Marty St. Louis has played for Tampa Bay seemingly forever. Ryan Kesler is a guy that's played in Vancouver his entire career as well. So, to see these staples from these teams kind of start to kind of demand trades to go somewhere else, and it's not like these teams are like cellar dwellers or anything. They're kind of within the thick of things still. Tampa Bay has, they're kind of right there. Vancouver, they've got a little more of a difficult route to go, being in the West where everybody is seemingly just incredibly stellar. But they've got a little more of an uphill climb. But it's kind of one of these rare things that, we haven't really seen this before. It's usually the fans or guys like Eklund, kind of stirring the rumor mill pot. And now the players basically started that. It's so bizarre, actually, this season. Last night,
I'll tell you, one thing that I think has been interesting, and I think a couple of weeks ago, I had heard Ryan Kesler's name come up and heard a couple of details with that. And there's so many things that go on throughout the year that you kind of write off most of it, and you realize that 99% of the deals that even get discussed by real general managers and not just us, it never really turn into much or never come to fruition. But that was one that I think popped up again and again, and the more you look at it, the more it really made sense. And I know the Penguins have really been interested in Ryan Kesler going back to a couple years ago, and he's a guy that they wanted. And the wild card for me was, why would the Canucks ever do that? Why would they give up Ryan Kesler, who I think has been their best player this year, better than both of the Sedins, and maybe that's not saying much on an underachieving Canucks team like you mentioned, but I think now we have that answer, is if Ryan Kesler wants out, Mike Gillis and the staff there in Vancouver don't have much of a choice. They've got to figure out something, because we saw how they kind of botched that whole Luongo deal, and that's where it gets really interesting, I think, over the next week or so here.
Yeah, it is, and it's kind of funny that, you mentioned the Sedin twins, and they haven't had the greatest of years under Tortorella there, and they don't really play the John Tortorella style, but Ryan Kesler kind of does. You would think that he would want to stay in that kind of situation because it would suit him better, wouldn't it?
Absolutely, yeah, that's a great point, because that was my biggest concern, is when you throw a guy like Tortorella into a roster that is perceived as soft and basically described as much by their general manager and management staff there. You wondered what was going to happen, and I think he's not getting the results, he being John Tortorella, he's not getting the results yet. They've had some struggles this year, and you kind of alluded to maybe it's not even fair to expect them to do well in that Western Conference that I think would even give the Penguins trouble if they were over there this season. But, that they are struggling. They're not adapting to his style of play, and I don't think they're really built to play that style. They have guys like the Sedins who I think you're exactly right, are not built for that style of hockey. Mm-hmm. And when you kind of see those cultures clash, it usually doesn't end well. I think we can look right to the Washington Capitals a couple of years ago, when Bruce Boudreau suddenly wanted to play a trapping system with an all-European, high-octane offense roster. It didn't work, and it was a disaster. Yeah. And I think then they brought in Dale Hunter, and for about 2 or 3 years there, the Capitals just really had no identity. They're still struggling, I think, in that respect, and that's the problem. You can't just bring in a coach and try to change overnight because it's much slower as far as building a roster. I think you put the coach in place, and then you slowly build the roster around that, and we see too many teams that kind of panic and go the other way around, and it rarely works out for them.
It's a little bit of the Cleveland Browns syndrome there, just kind of really want to fix everything, kind of magic, and that's not really how it works, like you mentioned. Well, Mike, last night you kind of sent Pens fans into that proverbial tub of electricity with your article on thehockeywriters.com, talking about how the Penguins were looking to possibly revive their three-center model with Ryan Kesler as a centerpiece of that. And that's really no slight on kind of a guy like Brandon Sutter, who has... The Penguins haven't had much of an identity with that third line since trading Jordan Staal for Brandon Sutter, And as you look at the postseason play over the past couple of years, one of the biggest things that kind of stick out is the bottom six scoring depth. They haven't really had that. Would a guy like Ryan Kesler from Vancouver actually solve those third line woes, or would it be basically the same thing, but instead of Sutter you would have the same scoring droughts basically on that third line, but with Kesler?
Yeah, that's a tough question, and I guess in the salary cap world, or at least where it is this year and at an artificially low level, you're going to have a weakness. There's no perfect roster out there right now, and every single team is struggling at some position, I think, and the fourth lines are definitely the weaknesses. And so how do you fix that? Can you go out and get 2 or 3 solutions? I mean, they were able to grab Taylor Payette off waivers, and he's been a nice fit, but a little bit pricey, and fortunately that's not an issue at this point with the way their cap situation is. But it's so tough to go out and grab Steve Ott and Eric Cole, or, legitimate third-line grinding guys. I think that's going to be very tough to do. Not that it'd be any easier to grab a guy like Ryan Kesler either. And I think that's where, in Ray Shearo's shoes, he's really just got to wait and see how the market evolves. And I think if Kesler comes to him, just as Jerome McGinley did last year, more or less, I think that's what really gets interesting. And I think with Kesler holding a no-trade clause, much like Iginla, you start to wonder, how could this play out? And if Kessler's driving the boat, where does he really push the Canucks? And are they forced into a situation where they have to take an offer that maybe not the most they could get had it been just an open auction where every 29 other teams in the NHL had an opportunity to kind of go after him? And so that's where I think it could get interesting. I think the Penguins could kind of be a wild card in that situation. And like I said, I had heard Kessler's name pop up before the Olympics, and I kind of chuckled to myself when I saw Dan Bilesman, Ray Shero on Team USA plop him right onto that top line center spot for the first game of the Olympics, and I think that was no coincidence at all. In that they're kind of setting the table there. That there was some behind the scenes moves to get Iginla kind of on board last year, and I wouldn't be surprised there were some interesting conversations in Sochi as well between the Penguins staff that was part of Team USA and Ryan Kesler, and those are all the behind the scenes factors that I think we all forget about and we really just aren't privy to, but are certainly influential when it comes time for a guy like Ryan Kessler to waive that no trade clause and decide where he's going to spend at least the next 2.5 years of his life.
Yeah, and you bring up a great point there. It's just the kind of the buttering up of maybe Ryan Kessler there to see what you kind of got on that first line, give him those first line minutes, and it's something that the Penguins do quite a bit throughout their organization. Like it's almost one of those models where they live by, where like we know that the salary cap says we could spend this much on your salary, but it doesn't mean we can't like give you the nicest amenities and butter you up in other situations, make your family feel incredibly welcome. They go out of their way and they go above and beyond to really make sure the players' experiences are great. And I wouldn't doubt it if that's one of the things that Shiro and Bylsma did. Here we go, fanning that flame a bit maybe for that rumor, but I wouldn't really doubt it if that is something that they did.
Yeah, and I had actually, I think it was probably 4 years ago now, but I kind of had that realization, and I wrote about it in Forbes. I called it the Penguins dividend, and it was something where, when you look at the Penguins situation, they boast Sidney Crosby and Evgeny Malkin, two of the best players in the world. They boast world-class facilities at a brand-new arena, one that many call the best in the NHL right now at the Consol Energy Center. They have an owner in Mario Lemieux with a stature that's probably second to none in the National Hockey League. And then you look at Ray Shero, a general manager that, 6 out of 7 deadlines has basically gone all in. He's never been afraid to go after that championship and go after that opportunity to pull the trigger and really upgrade the roster. And that's another thing that I think, on the surface, it's a trade, and maybe he's a little bit reckless with some of the deals that haven't worked out. But I think just the signal that he sends to players when he is willing to go out there and make those deals and say, listen, I know you guys are really putting it out there every single night. I'm going to do everything in my power to get the best team possible here on the ice. And I think that's a factor as well. And then you even look at how he treats the players as far as, can you think of any player that Ray Shero has ever bought out? Can you think of any player that Ray Shero has ever demoted and buried like we've seen so many general managers do? The answer to the first question is 0. The answer to the second question, I think, is 1, and the only one was Miroslav Shatan, which was about 4 years ago when they acquired Bill Guerin and really had a cap crunch. And I don't know that the story ever really made it out, but Ray Shero was on the phone every single day to Shatan while he was in Wilkes-Barre for about 2 weeks to make sure Shatan was okay with it and make sure he was comfortable with spending a couple of weeks down there while they tried to kind of tap dance around the salary cap issues that they had. And those are the things that, again, none of us talk about ever, but I think they're huge. They're critical. Other players in the league see that, and that becomes the deciding factor when a free agent or a guy like a Ginla or Kessler is sitting there saying, do I want to go to Minnesota or do I want to go to Pittsburgh? And those are the things they start to weigh. It's really not the things that we probably put at the top of the priority list. It's those smaller factors that often get ignored by fans and media alike.
You mentioned tap dancing around the salary cap. Looking at it right now, the Pens have almost $1.2 million in cap space. Kessler has a $5 million cap hit. How are they going to fit him under if the trade happens?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it's certainly going to require a tap dance. I would say it's easier this year for fans that want to kind of play Ray Shero and play fantasy hockey general manager and kind of predict trades and how they might fit. In normal years, you would have cap space that would be banked throughout the year, and then you've got to prorate that based on how much time is left. You don't have to deal with any of that this year. The Penguins are through the salary cap right now and utilizing long-term injured reserve money for Thomas Vokoun and Pascal Dupuis. And so that's where it would get interesting. It's basically a dollar-for-dollar game. So for as long as Vokoun and Dupuis are out, which at this point we're assuming is the rest of the season, you have dollar-for-dollar on those guys' contracts to replace their salaries. And I think then your lever that you can pull is like Chris Letang. And I think it wasn't a surprise today. I mean, I was a little shocked that his situation was worse than maybe the team had let on, and it didn't sound too good from a health perspective, and you hope that he's able to just recover at some point, let alone this season. But that from kind of your hard dollar standpoint, that becomes your next lever you pull. If you need to bring Kessler in and you don't move enough salary going the other direction, now you move Letang onto long-term IR, and what can happen then is you put him on for the rest of the regular season, and when you get to the playoffs, there is no salary cap. So you can activate, pretty much whoever you want at that point. And we haven't seen teams abuse that, but I think it's coming. I think especially this year when I think you've got about 12 teams that are utilizing that long-term IR to kind of just stay cap compliant. We're going to see some interesting games here, and we're going to see how teams kind of get around that and try to get players in the mix and at least fit there so that they can load up for a playoff roster that's a little bit more impressive than they have right now.
Why haven't they put Letang on long-term IR yet? Is there like a cap advantage to be gained by waiting?
No, there's not. So what's interesting is it's something where if they put him on long-term IR, he's required to basically miss a month of hockey. And what happens then is until you need that long-term IR exemption is how they term it, you don't need to put him on that. And in fact, you can't really put him on that. It's something where until you need those dollars, you don't use them. And so at this point, he's just sitting there on IR. They needed Thomas Vokoun's money to keep Olli Mata and sign Chuck Kobasu at the beginning of the year. So Thomas Vokoun was right away from day one on long-term IR. And then as Pascal Dupuis was injured, they had to do some shuffling there, and they had to put him on long-term IR just to get all the call-ups they had about a month or two ago. So they're not at a point, and you mentioned, I don't even know the exact numbers today, but they're probably about $1 to $1.5 million from kind of hitting that next tier where they've got to make a decision. And so one option is Letang, and if you're not in the camp where you want to kind of shut Letang down for the rest of the season, the one thing to keep in mind is you have Taylor Pyatt on this roster at $1.55 million. He's a guy they claimed off of waivers, and they could easily throw back onto waivers and more or less dump that entire cap hit back into the minors or to another team altogether. So that's a pretty big chunk of money. If you need to really make a move and you get desperate, Pyatt, I think, becomes a logical move. If you don't want to get Letang, out of the mix for the rest of the regular season, Pyatt becomes the logical option in my mind.
Now, you also have Paul Martin, who is going to be missing a good amount of time here, possibly put on the LTIR if he hasn't been already, actually. So this, all of a sudden, you're starting to see the door kind of open a little wider and wider and wider. So not only is it possible to get a guy like Kessler probably at this point in time, but you could probably also get a guy like Brad Boyes from Florida to maybe come up and play with Sidney Crosby, couldn't you?
You could do any move, and that's what I didn't understand is, Ray Shearer came out on Tuesday afternoon and said he couldn't really pin a number. And just the last, 5 or 10 minutes that we've been talking, you can understand why there is no number. It's not an answer that you can just say the Penguins have 1 million or 4 million or 5.5. I mean, I couldn't even tell you, but I can tell you they can do any move that they want to if they want to get creative with that roster. And I think that's the flexibility that they'd like to have. And maybe it requires putting Letang out for a week or two at the end of the year, but given his situation, I don't think that's necessarily the worst thing. And when it comes to Paul Martin, if you're talking 4 or 6 weeks from now, you're pushing the end of the regular season. And again, I don't think it's the worst thing to give him a little extra time. And given his injury history, I don't think he's a guy that we really want to rush back from an injury if you're the Pittsburgh Penguins coach and management staff. So the options are there, and I think that got kind of lost in translation with Shiro's comments that there's a lot of moving parts and teams are pressed up against the salary cap. But I think given the Penguins' just rash of injuries right now, they've actually got a lot of flexibility. It's just not going to be straightforward or easy to kind of piece together. But the options are there, the flexibility's there, and now it's just a matter of does the right deal come across Shiro's table where he can pull the trigger and make a deal that makes sense for this Penguins team.
So let's play what if a little bit, and let's look down the road just a little bit beyond this season here. Ryan Kessler, let's say he does get traded to Pittsburgh. They fit him under the salary cap this year. That looks very doable. But what about next season when Letang's extension kicks in, when Gino's extension kicks in? Like, there's less money kind of there, but the salary cap goes up. But there's also roster spots that need to be filled with guys like Brooks Orpik leaving, Matt Niskanen possibly leaving. Like, these guys kind of create a little bit of cap space, but I mean, at the same time, you have to fill those positions, don't you?
Yeah, I kind of have my projection going into the trade deadline where I think, okay, where will they be next year? And the conclusion I got to was they had about $5 million in kind of flexible money to work with, and that would count. I counted spending $5 million on Matt Niskanen, which is more than I think the Penguins would pay. I think they'll probably end up keeping him for about $4.5 million over a multi-year deal. I don't think they'll keep Brooks Orpik, and so I'm counting that into play. I think he'll go elsewhere and get a lot more money than the Penguins are willing to give him. And spending about $1 million each on the holes that they have on the third and fourth line. I think that's fair when you consider that, right now they've got about 4 or 5 guys that are making league minimum at $550,000, and so that'll average out to about $1 million. And so that gives you some basic math there, gives you about $5 million to play with. And I think that's where Ryan Kesler fits at 2 years left on his contract, $5 million a year. In my mind, Ryan Kesler fits. The problem, I think, goes back to kind of the comments you guys mentioned early on with you don't really still have great wingers. You don't have Matt Cook and Tyler Kennedy even, despite, all the criticism he took. You really don't have the legitimate proven wingers to play with Kesler should that happen, and I think that's what becomes tough is can Kesler carry a line? I think he can do it better than Sutter. That's been my biggest disappointment with Brandon Sutter is I think he's totally fine as a $2 million guy playing alongside talented line mates on the third line, but he's not shown he's capable of carrying that third line. And I think in order to win a Stanley Cup, you've got to have really 3 good centers and 3 good lines. And I think it comes down to star power, and you maybe don't need a full line. We're seeing Brian Gibbons and guys like that fill in on Evgeny Malkin and Sidney Crosby's line. I think you need one and ideally 2 really good players on a line. And after that, I think you can really fill in kind of warm bodies at that point. And we've seen the Penguins do that quite a bit and still be able to score offensively.
Now, we talked a little bit about there's no salary cap in the postseason, and you can't really bury salary like you used to in the AHL, but the Penguins did that with Miro Shatan, we said in 2009. It worked out really well for him. He ends up leaving this team with a Stanley Cup ring. Is it a long-term IR, though, now essentially the new way for GMs to potentially bury salary? We kind of hinted on it just a bit, but I'm assuming you would have to show some kind of medical proof on these guys. You just can't say, oh, he's got a broken hand. He's out for a month and a half, whatever, and kind of have enough space to open it up. You kind of have to, kind of like high school, you have to show that doctor's excuse if you miss for a doctor's exam, don't you?
Yeah, you're exactly right. And I think many of the general managers or owners or whoever crafts that unique document that's for really thought that through. And there is a clause in there where if they sense that a team is taking advantage of that provision, I believe it's even Gary Bettman that can request that an independent doctor investigate and look into the player. But thinking through that and thinking who we're talking about, you've got Thomas Vokoun and Chris Letang as kind of the 2 players in question if you're really looking at the Penguins roster. And how do you question Thomas Vokoun and his blood clot situation and coming off the blood thinners? And he's had this situation before. I mean, that's if I'm an independent doctor, I don't know how I stand there and question that and say this guy should be playing and he's cheating the system. And I think the same certainly applies to Chris Letang, given what we heard today, or at least this morning, from him. So, yeah, it is a factor. But we are seeing more teams than ever utilize that because I think the salary cap is lower. And again, until you hit the cap, you never need to put a player on long-term IR. It's just not something that ever needs to happen until you get to that point where you need to utilize the flexibility and the exemption. And right now, I think you've got 12 out of 30 teams that are just staying cap compliant by utilizing long-term IR. And that's incredible when you think about, having that many injured players and that many teams so close to the cap. I think it just leaves a lot of them with no flexibility, and that's what gets tough. And again, I just think the Penguins, with their situation, and maybe it's a blessing in disguise they have all these injuries, because I think they've got the flexibility to pull off that big deal if it does so come to pass over the next few days.
Yeah, it's a little bit of bittersweet good fortune in a way. Mike, what to you is the biggest need on the Penguins roster right now? They've got a lot of issues pretty much everywhere throughout this lineup. I mean, two of the top four defensemen out for most of the rest of the season, if not the rest of the season, regular season. It would be nice to get Crosby a winger that could skate with he and Chris Kunitz. Pretty much that's the topic every trade deadline, it seems. And then you have the bottom six scoring depth and size and lack of it, basically, and potential wingers possibly on that. Like, what do you see as the biggest need the Penguins need to fill?
Well, Nick, I'll say the biggest challenge, I think, facing Ray Shero is, as you mentioned, a logical spot and hole on the roster right now is that right wing on Sidney Crosby's line. The problem is you make the assumption that Pascal Dupuis will be back next year. He's just starting a new multi-year contract, and so you don't have a long-term hole there necessarily unless Pascal Dupuis would not be the same guy that we've seen for the last few years. And so that's what makes it tough, is because then, are you really going out and paying top dollar for Ryan Callahan to come in and for 3 weeks be your right winger, and then, you've gutted your prospect system. You have nothing to show for him going into next year, and now you're kind of starting at square one if you don't win the Stanley Cup. And so I don't think a rental makes sense, but the type of player, if you had to say, could you give a profile of kind of the biggest need, it'd be a guy that can move up and down the lineup. He can play on Crosby's line, and I think the biggest component there is speed. You need a guy that can skate with Sidney Crosby and even Chris Kunitz, and you need a guy that can even have chemistry with him, and I think that's proven to be a little bit harder and more difficult than we seem to think. But you need a guy that can also move down to the third line. And when you don't need an extra scoring punch on that first line, he can be a very effective, grinding, checking line guy. And I started to think, okay, who fits that bill? Who can play the right wing on the first line but move to the third line and maybe chip in on the penalty kill, since you did lose Pascal Dupuis? There weren't many names out there. One that I thought fit would perhaps be Eric Cole out of Dallas. And, Cole's in an interesting situation where he scored over 30 goals in Montreal a couple seasons ago. Went to Dallas and didn't really click right away, but now he's starting to find his role as kind of a veteran on that team. But you wonder where Dallas is, and I believe he's got a year left at $4.5 million. So is he a guy that could fit? He's a guy with a ton of speed. He's plays like a bull in a china shop, goes to the net hard, so would fit great on a third line, kind of like Brendan Morrow did last year. But he's also got the speed to go with Crosby and jump up on that first line and 35 goals, so he's proven it in the past. So, that would be my thinking, is can you find a guy that's versatile and can score and is physical? And, it sounds like we're putting out our Christmas list here, but I think, that's what I would think. If I could find the perfect fit for the Penguins at the trade deadline, that's exactly what it would be, and it would fill multiple roles and also give you the flexibility of not having a rental, having a guy locked up at a reasonable price next year, because you're going to have Pascal Dupuis kind of returning to the lineup and really giving this Penguins roster a bit of a different feel up front.
It's almost like you're replacing Pascal Dupuis with Pascal Dupuis, because that's exactly the same kind of player he is. I mean, you could play up and down this lineup. That's one of the reasons they got him, and it just so happened that he meshed pretty well with Sidney Crosby, and he stayed there. He was a third, fourth line guy in Atlanta, comes to Pittsburgh, is first line material all of a sudden. The interesting thing is Pascal Dupuis here in a way. Like, it looks like that rehab 6 to 8 months. He spoke with media earlier today. And that puts you around August, right towards the start of training camp. And then you have that physical therapy to kind of get up to speed and stuff like that. When Shero signed him last year, after career season after career season after career season, eventually he had to have known that he would be slowing down at some point, because a guy with that kind of talent, based on speed and grit and willing to grind it out, kind of wears out kind of quickly. So you would have to expect that he would have been third line material at some point at the duration of that contract, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. And when you think of, why would they sign that contract, or what was the reasoning if you're Ray Shero? And I think, coming off of what I think he probably had about 60 points 2 years ago, and he was probably ahead of that pace last year in the half season. A 60-point guy in this day and age is definitely $5 million. And I had come out publicly and said I thought Dupuis could get over $5 million on the open market if he decided to go there, and I didn't think he would, and I thought he'd be willing to take the hometown discount to stay in Pittsburgh. He's got a pretty big family that's got its roots here in the city. And, that's how it played out. I was shocked at how low he was willing to come. But when you think about it from kind of that tailing off factor that you mentioned, and not just straight cap hit over the 4 years that they signed him for, I think that's where it makes a little bit more sense. So his cap hit's at 3.75. If you assume that he's a 60-point guy this year, and, a 60-point guy is $5 million, now it starts to make sense. And so you bring that down over 4 years from $5 million to $4 million to $3 million to $2 million. 4 years from now, if you tell me you're paying Pascal Dupuis $2 million to be your third liner in an environment where the salary cap's risen by probably 15, maybe even $20 million, I say, man, that is a steal. I think you'll look back on that, and regardless of what happens, and unless Pascal Dupuis is forced to retire based on this knee injury, I think that'll be a steal. And so I think that's exactly what Shero was thinking is, he doesn't want to give out that term. I know that was a big thing for him a few years ago, was no one got more than 3 years besides the guys in the so-called core of, Stahl and Crosby and Malkin, Fleury, Letang. But it's something he had to budge on. That's the way the market is now, is guys are going for term. And if you're not willing to give it to them, they can go elsewhere and get it. And I think that's where he's been willing to negotiate and give in a little bit, but he still gets these guys on dirt cheap contracts. And I think, when you have a guy like Jason Botterill kind of looking at that salary cap and where it's going, and I know they kind of make at least rough projections, at least from the numbers I've looked at it, the cap's going to fly up. And so you're going to be in a situation where $3 million this year is going to look very, very different 4 years from now when you say a $3 million guy is, Pascal Dupuis on your third or fourth line.
Now, I mean, we talked about Dupuis having those career seasons, one after another. And then this season, before the injury, he didn't really look like that same player that they signed him to. When I look at Matt Niskanen right now, in the year that he's having, is there any reservations, do you think, in Ray Shero's mind of re-signing a guy like Matt Niskanen into a big $4.75 million contract per year?
Yeah, that's a great observation, I think, and it's something that really hadn't crossed my mind. But I agree. Pascal Dupuis was not the same player earlier this year, and just really couldn't get going at all. And his season came to a screeching halt now with that knee injury. But yeah, it feels like Matt Niskanen's kind of playing his way out of his skates and becoming a little bit of a question mark. I mean, he's a great guy, and what was so funny is how the narrative's changed. In training camp, the fan base was convinced that Matt Niskanen was traded, and they didn't really care if they were going to get anything in return. It was just to kind of get cap compliant and have a roster for day one. And suddenly, a couple months later, now Matt Niskanen is the savior and the hero and the best player and the MVP and Norris Trophy and everything else that goes along with it. Man, I don't think either story was really accurate. I think he wasn't the player you give away for nothing. I thought he played really well last year as well, but he wasn't as good as some of the talk mid-season, and I think that was a factor of him playing on that third pair. You're going to get the easier matchups there. You're not going to play big minutes or in tough situations. And that's nothing to take away from Matt Niskanen and how he's been playing. I think he's been great this year. But I think you can be deceived a little bit. And if you're another team, as you mentioned, where you're sitting there saying, are we willing to pay $5 million for Matt Niskanen because he's just looked so good and he's plus 25 and he could be a first-pairing defenseman or a number 3 guy on our team. Let's give him the money. you could be ruined for a rude awakening when he does get it thrust into that, bigger responsibility. And we've seen some guys really struggle with that when they get the big payday is they're not really what you thought they were. And I think you're right on the money there is there could be a risk. And I think Shiro will know that better than any other GM. It's just a matter of, what are other GMs willing to do and what risks are they willing to take? And then Matt Niskanen, is he really interested in staying in Pittsburgh, which I wouldn't be surprised is the case because I know he really appreciates what Pittsburgh did. They kind of put his career back on track because he was headed to a dark place in Dallas there. And even when he came over to Pittsburgh, he was a guy that was really mentally fragile and just really had no confidence in his game and didn't seem like he was really ever going to be able to find it. And I give the Penguins coaching staff a lot of credit, and I think Niskanen would too, is they've been able to kind of get him back on track and revive his career to the point where now we're talking about, $5 million for a guy that may have been done had he stayed down there in Dallas.
Mm-hmm. And it's kind of weird because we talked also about all the moving pieces right now, and if all the talk going into the training camp was this guy's going to pretty much be a goner, and the way that he ended up playing, you could have sold so high on Matt Niskanen right now if you had that luxury. Unfortunately, they really don't have that luxury, do they?
Yeah, that's a good point. And that's what's so funny is what makes so much sense today, or what made so much sense 2 months ago, or at the beginning of the season, is usually very, very different, and that's how quickly things can change. And I think that's why Shiro hasn't been afraid to be aggressive at the trade deadline as well. Is I was just thinking today back on the players that supposedly were can't miss prospects, and the Penguins were crazy to give them up. And you think even back to Noah Welch for Gary Roberts, and I don't know if you guys remember the reaction to that trade, but it was Gary Roberts is great, but Noah Welch is the next Nick Lidstrom, and he's going to save us on defense. And then it was Luca Caputi and Angelo Esposito and Joe Morrow, and none of those guys are in the NHL right now. And I don't know if the Penguins are that good at just knowing when their prospects are not the real deal and it's time to move on, or they've gotten lucky or what. But I think there's a bit of a trend there that's interesting, and it shows how quickly things can change where a guy like Joe Morrow is number one prospect in the organization, and 18 months later he's struggling to even really find some playing time in the American Hockey League. And that's where you can't be overreactive and you can't go crazy as a general manager, but you've got to realize, what we can only predict so far. We can only see so far in the future, and there's so much that's going to be ripped up. And I remember talking to again, assistant GM Jason Botterill, and he said when he came into Pittsburgh, he sat down and, he wanted to prove to Ray Shero that he had what it took and he was ready for the job. And he drew up all these 5-year plans about, where the team was going to go and how the cap was going to fit. And then they went into the trade deadline that year and they pulled the trigger on Marian Hossa because I took all these 5-year plans and I threw them in the garbage because they never expected to go to the salary cap that year. They never expected to add Hossa. It was something that just changed overnight, and it changed the complexion of the team altogether, and that's how quickly it can change. And I think, you have to balance being a little bit too reckless with just saying, hey, we don't know we're going to be six months from now, so let's put the best team we can out there on the ice right now and see what happens.
Yeah, and kudos to the Penn scouts and management for basically figuring all of that out, and on top of that, like once they know what they have there, painting the narrative that these guys are can't miss prospects. You want these guys, and there's nothing more that you want than Luca Caputi. And thanks for all your good players. So, Mike, thanks so much for coming on. Yep. And it's just a great time, and it's kind of fun to look back at that, isn't it?
It is. It's funny when you do look back on it, and like I said, today was the first day I really saw back on the guys that they had given up. That I think if you told most people, they'd say, "Oh well, Luca Caputi was never supposed to be good anyways." And back when he was traded, that was not the sentiment, and people thought Ray Shero was crazy for giving them up. So it's kind of funny to look back now on these guys that have really never gone anywhere. And not that the Penguins nailed every single deadline deal. And if you remember, Caputi was in the Alex Ponikarovsky trade, and that certainly didn't work out in the Penguins' favor. But they didn't give up a surefire prospect as well, which many were saying at the time.
Cool. All right. Well, Mike, thanks for jumping on with us tonight. We'll have to talk again soon.
Yeah, absolutely, guys. Anytime. And I think we should have an interesting, 6 or 7 days here, and we'll see where the Penguins end up heading into the playoffs.
Happy trade deadline, Mike.
Thanks, guys. Take care.
Thanks.
See ya. That was Mike Colligan from thehockeywriters.com and Forbes Sports Money. Earlier today, Casey, Chris Letang, every Penguins fan's favorite Pittsburgh Penguin, spoke to the media earlier for the first time since his stroke. So let's listen to what he had to say.
Didn't hear that.
Chris, can you start off with just how you're feeling and how this has affected you to find out the news with your diagnosis?
How I feel. For right now, I feel I have some good days, bad days. Like I said to many people, I'm going day by day to get to 100%. I think the most difficult was to hang out around family. Everybody is really careful. I can't even lift their luggage without having them trying to help me out. So, but otherwise, it's just been mentally a little bit tough.
When you're talking about bad days, you're talking about physically how you feel. You feel tired. Some of the same symptoms that you were having before. Or?
Yeah, exactly. It's not as bad as when it happens, but there's symptoms to it, and some days it's stronger symptoms than other.
How about mentally? There's some challenging days you have.
Yeah, especially with the family. That's I think the main thing. For my part, I always want to get back and play games. Like right now, I would like to step on the ice and play, but there's many things that hold me to do that, and certainly my family is really worried, and that was the difficult part to manage when you see your mom crying or your wife or any of my family members. It's always a tough thing to handle.
Chris, is it conceivable for you to come back this year, or are you targeting more next year as a likely possibility?
I'm targeting, like I said, day by day. I'm trying to improve every day. I come here, I try to exercise the best I can. I see doctors pretty much every week, twice a week, to get better. So we'll go from there.
Chris, I know that they've got you on blood thinners. Do you know what happens after that? I mean, are they expecting that to clear things up, or would you still maybe have to have a procedure? And you've got a little thing with your heart. Would you have to have a procedure to correct that at some point?
For now, we gotta stay on the blood thinners, and I think it's in 2 or 3 weeks. I'm meeting them again. I will go through another battery of tests, and we'll take decision from there. But for now, we're keeping that like this.
Have you been told that I think there's a little hole in your heart? Have you been told that that's related to your migraines?
We talked about it a little bit, but that was not our main problem. Right. But this hole in the heart is might have been the cause, but they're not 100% sure. So we don't really want to worry about that for now.
How important is it for you to be in this environment here in the room and watching practice and so forth?
It's important. I mean, I don't want to hang out at home, and I mean it's fun. I have my son, and he's growing fast, and it's been fun watching him going. But to be around the team, I see, and coming into the rink, working out, seeing doctors, I feel like I'm trying to make steps, getting closer to come back at one point. But that's how I feel about that.
Chris, were the symptoms something that took a while, like things you noticed over time, or was it one episode that really got you worried?
No, it's one day that I woke up and my wife found me on the ground, and that's how it was.
Was it the day before you flew out to L.A.?
It was, it was the morning. I was getting ready to go to L.A. with my mom, obviously for the mom's trip, and that's how it happened. So.
Did you feel like you were just ill, or did you think there was something more wrong?
No, I like the day before I was totally fine. I was practicing, and I woke up that morning not expecting that would happen, and it went like this. And actually, I went in my car with my mom, drove to LA, and thought it would clear up, but never did. So
your wife found you on the ground at the house?
Yeah.
She called 911?
No. We actually her mom was there. Her mom is a nurse, so took care of me.
Were you out for the time, or were you?
No. I was just not able to function. So.
You guys your age and the shape you're in, you hear about injuries and concussions and stuff. When you hear you had a stroke, how hard is that to believe? And even now, is it?
It's tough to believe, but a lot of people say I'm in that percentage, the 0.01. So honestly, when I found out, I kind of didn't really believe it. Well, first I didn't understand the word, so I had to call my wife and ask her like what was it, because she went to school in English, so I kind of figured it out, and from there you think if you're gonna be all right, if I'm gonna have the chance to play hockey again, but I was surrounded by great doctors. They took a great care of me, and all my questions were answered. So no, I feel I'm making progress, I guess.
Have you reached out? Have you heard from, or have you talked to other people that are about in your age range who've had something like this?
No, not for now. I think I've been focusing on just, like I said, talking with my doctors and trying to rehab things that I need to rehab.
Chris, have the doctors assured you that you will be able to play hockey again at some point, whether it's this year or not?
Yeah, they said, like, from being 26 and having a stroke, it's actually like a small percentage, but the chance that I get back to normal is really high. So they kind of reassure me that I will play again.
How much of that percentage of getting back to normal has to do with the prospect of having the hole in your heart taken care of? Does that go hand in hand with that, or is that separate?
The hole in the heart, actually, it's not a problem, because I've been living with it for 26 years. I never had a problem with that, conditioning-wise or anything like that. So the symptoms that are experienced right now is from that stroke, what it damaged or did to my brain. So for now, it's just worrying about my head.
And you're going to table the thought of a surgery for the hole in the heart then?
We already talked about it. That's something that we're not focusing on right now.
What are you able to do in terms of workout? I mean, you're kind of a workout beast when you do workout. What are you able to do? Do you have to keep that a little bit to a minimum?
I started by light stuff, no weights. Right now we try to intensify things, trying to teach my head and my body how to react to workout or intense workout, so I get back to normal quicker.
Is it kind of like dealing with a concussion, where good days and bad days, you push yourself to where maybe you might have symptoms where you have to see what you can do? Is it a little bit like that?
Kind of, yeah. You can see it like that. Except the concussion, you don't want to get too many symptoms, and in that case, you want to push yourself so your brain try to compensate for what it's not able to do right now.
What has this season been like for you, not only with this, but in preseason injuries as well as the elbow injury out there?
I mean, I'm gonna say it's not really a good season for me. Not really lucky. Two of them were kind of bad luck. But honestly, if I have the chance to come back this year and play, it's gonna be great. And I want to make sure I forgive all about the 3/4 of the season I missed.
And that was Chris Letang earlier today speaking with the media. Scary situation there, Casey. Found by his wife, not able to function on the floor. That's no way you want to be found. I mean, that's needless to say, but that's some scary stuff there, isn't it?
Yeah, I can't imagine like having the doctors explain it to me and then not knowing what they mean. You know, he said he had to call his wife to have her explain what a stroke was to him in French, and I just can't imagine that. That's scary stuff.
Frightening things. We don't really have a timeline on this. We do know in 2 to 3 weeks he'll get kind of evaluated and see where he is there. But in your mind, is there any chance that he plays the rest of this season at all, the regular season? We'll leave the postseason outside of this, but Do you see him coming back at any time before the postseason?
I mean, not being a doctor, of course, it's hard for me to imagine. I've been practicing medicine on social media, but that's about it.
Like every other Pens fan.
Yeah, pretty much. I'm a stroke expert
We're all
now.
in the same. We're all in the same boat. Strokes and concussions. We know it all.
Yeah, but I mean, it's hard to imagine. I mean, especially with him still being on blood thinners, and we saw how long, Tomas Vokoun went through with his recovery period, and with him being on the blood thinners and everything. It's just, I mean, there's a month and a half left in the season now. It's hard to imagine he would be playing hockey in the regular season, but I mean, I guess anything could happen.
Yeah, and hopefully we see a return soon. I mean, you just hate to see things like that happen to anybody, really, let alone someone that you kind of root for night in and night out to do well for your team. So all the best wishes to the Letang family. Hopefully it's a quick, speedy recovery, and he's back to feeling normal, like, really soon. The interesting thing was to me that he was saying he was working out. Are you surprised at all by that?
Not really. I mean, especially when he said it was light workouts with no weights or anything. I guess it didn't really surprise me. But yeah, I mean, hopefully he's able to get back to it and get back to playing hockey soon.
All right, well, shifting gears to tonight's game against the Montreal Canadiens. 6-5, the Canadiens win in a shootout. Did you notice any rust on this Pens team tonight?
Yeah, a little. I mean,
they haven't given up 5 for a while.
They haven't given up 5 for a while, and they let up 29 shots for the Canadiens. That's a lot for them this season. So yeah, I think there was a little rust, and you know what? It wasn't just rust on the guys who haven't been playing. There was some rust on the guys who were at the Olympics too. I don't know if it's readjusting back to their teammates or readjusting back to the 200 by 85 ice, but there was a little rust on them. The Daniel Briere's, I think it was his last power play goal, went off the skate of Oli Mata as he was in the crease. I didn't think Fleury was great post to post tonight, so yeah, just a little rust. This doesn't bother me.
It's now 2 shootouts in a row for Marc-Andre Fleury to lose after winning so many. He's been so clutch in the shootouts, and then tonight, in the last game, was it New York, the Rangers beat him in a shootout?
Yeah, that's so. 2 games in a row. I mean, it feels like it was a long time ago, but yeah, that's 2 games in a row now. They've lost in the shootout. I don't know. I mean, I don't have his save percentages in shootouts off the top of my head, but I mean, if your teammates aren't going to score a goal in the shootout, then I guess you don't really have a chance yourself. What was Gino doing on his attempt? He just looked like he kind of gave up. He's just like, it's like he just skated down the ice and was like, "Let me get this over with," and he just kind of slapped it and skated away.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, and I'm sure that's going to be a pretty big topic of discussion tomorrow on shows like Mark Madden's, where he's kind of calling out Gino a bit to kind of man up. Don't sulk over disappointment in Sochi. Just get out there and man up. And tonight it didn't really help Malkin's cause to kind of just go skate down there and okay, here we go. Like it's almost like he sulked just a bit. And it's not what you want to see out of one of your big superstars, out of one of the best players in the world. You want him to kind of have that hunger and that thirst to kind of really go out there and take over the game. And, and in that situation, he had the chance to extend that, and it really didn't pan out for him. Hopefully,
yeah, especially he had 2 primary assists tonight. And, it wasn't even 10 minutes into the game. He's skating down the slot. He feeds Neil for a goal. So, it didn't look like he was sulking until that shootout move.
And maybe, that's just occasionally we see, like a slower, methodical kind of thing from Gino. And we've seen a slap shot before on a breakaway against Marty Biron against the Flyers in 2009, where it's just like, okay, I'm just going to wind up on a breakaway and take a slap shot. You don't see that often, especially from a guy that has such good hands. He's got good finesse, and he should have been able to deke out. And it just didn't happen tonight. Hopefully, though, like I said, they kind of right the ship because they don't really have a lot of time, but they do have a little bit of time to kind of readjust before Saturday's big game in Chicago in the Stadium Series. That's going to be a lot of fun to watch. It looks like the weather is going to be perfect for that game, nice and brisk, kind of cold Chicago winter night, and it's going to be some good hockey with a lot of good kind of big superstars out there, and hopefully Gino kind of fits right back into that niche like he did in the early parts of the game tonight, where he's just kind of out there and he looks like he's ready to go. Hopefully the sulk Gino doesn't kind of reappear on a national spotlight stage. He's got a good chance to kind of exercise a lot of demons that night, put himself back on that map, and kind of get the rest of his season kind of on track where he wants it to be. And he wants to win the Stanley Cup. He wanted to win gold, and he got some disappointment. But now you got to put it behind you. You got to move forward. And what better test than Chicago Blackhawks, Jonathan Toews, Patrick Kane, Patrick Sharp. Like, there's so many skilled players on that team, and he fits right into that discussion, doesn't he?
Yeah, just the whole next 2 weeks coming up for the Penguins. They have the game against Chicago. Next week they have games against San Jose and Anaheim. And then the week after that they have home and homes against Washington and Philadelphia. So they have a tough road ahead. So they have to put a lot behind them because they've got a lot ahead of them.
They do have a lot ahead of them, and the trade deadline is right there. So, next time we talk, who knows what this Penguins roster could even look like? Malkin might have another line mate. He might, have another player on his team to kind of get accustomed to. So we'll see how this all really
might be
out.
Playing for a new team. You never know.
Malkin to the LA Kings. I don't know.
For
that
Mike Camilleri, is that trade still available?
Oh, dear God. I hope not. Well, that's going to do it for us tonight. You can follow us on Twitter at the Pens Nation. You can follow Casey at KCR82. You can follow me at PensNation_Nick. Thanks to Mike Colligan for jumping on tonight, talking trade deadline, salary cap. He's the guru of all gurus when it comes to salary cap and that inside look at kind of the inner workings of a team, and he gave a great glimpse of that tonight. Make sure you follow him at Mike Colligan on Twitter. Great stuff over at thehockeywriters.com. Check it out. Really good, interesting article on the Penguins 3-center model. Definitely, if you haven't read that yet, go there, read it, and we'll see you later.
Let's get out of here.
Let's get out of here.
Let's get out of here. Let's get out of here.